why don't we get started? John, I know you started out on the DARPA team, the winning DARPA team in 2007, and there's been so much investment and so many changes in the sector globally with autonomous vehicles, and it kind of sparked with the DARPA challenges in 2006 and 2007. So can you, tell us how you think everything has evolved and what you see for the next 3, 4, 5 years in the United States and China and the rest of the world?
Sure, I'll give you a thumbnail sketch. One thing that happened close to the time of the race, right after we finished, was that Tony Tether, the head of DARPA at that time, had us down to Washington, D.C. for a dinner. And he basically said, go forth and prosper. DARPA's not going to have anything more to do with it. And so then there was a lull, I'd say, of a few years. Let's see, the Google car project got started around 2009, I think. And Chris Urmson left CMU to go head that up. And then obviously they made steady progress over a number of years, but I'd say things started to heat up maybe in the mid 2010s, where you started to see a variety of things happening. Some of the things that were obvious physically, like the cosmetics, the cars changed. The urban challenge cars had a lot of things hanging off of them. Those got zipped into the bodies of the vehicles, and they look more like showroom floor cars. Obviously, there's been a lot of great advancement in perception with deep learning, enabling better detection and segmentation. And then each of the companies has developed their autonomy stacks, their logging ability, their testing and prediction has become a really important part of autonomous driving, because one of the things that's tough to do is to understand what other people are going to do and then to react safely and appropriately. And that's probably the last X% of things that still need to be worked out for autonomous driving to be viable. So what's going to happen in the next 5 years? Well, I always am hesitant to try to be a prophet, but I think a big theme, and maybe we'll talk about it a fair amount tonight, is how do we make vehicles safe enough to allow them to be on the road? And then another thing that needs to be cleared up is, what are the viable business cases? The trucking is certainly a good one, I think, and there's some other possibilities. There are others that don't seem to have taken off much at this point, like ride sharing. So I think there'll be plenty of chance to talk more about it, but those are just in broad brushstrokes some of the key themes.
Okay, right on. So Tudor, can you give us an introduction of your company, number one, and part of that commercialization that John is talking about is maybe your partnership with Honda, the Honda Accelerator. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on with them and what Helm's doing to help them in the autonomous vehicle space?
Yeah, happy to. So just to start as a bit of introduction, so my name is Tudor Achim. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Helm. As you mentioned, I started my career in machine learning at core, and then did AI research at Stanford, and then I started Helm with my co-founder Vladislav Borninsky. And what Helm is an AI software automation company at its heart. I think it's beyond autonomous vehicles, but essentially what we're doing first is building the state-of-the-art AV software using the power of unsupervised deep learning. So our business model is a bit different from these full stack companies, in the sense that we have an Android business model. We license hardware agnostic AI software to automakers, for their autopilot solutions. And by leveraging the large scale validation that comes from these deployments, we then build full stack solutions for adjacent verticals. And there's like a couple multi-trillion-dollar markets we aim to address, like L4 highway trucking, urban delivery, robotaxis, and over time robotics at large. So, as to the specific question about the Honda Accelerator, I think definitely can't comment on too many details of these specific partnerships, but we actually see high-end ADAS, right, like Tesla Autopilot and other software that's going to come out from other OEMs, as actually being on the unique critical path to L4 autonomy. And the reason we think it's the unique critical path is that really the core of L4, besides the software itself, is actually the large-scale validation. So there's like the version of L4 that's like in very limited scenarios, and there's the version of L4 that's like broadly, has like a broad business case. And for that, you need to like understand the performance of the system at scale. So we actually think that, partnering with OEMs at the L2 plus and L3 level is actually effectively partnering towards launching L4 capable systems which start with L2 plus and L3 and then are upgraded after enough validation.
Okay, great. Now, Gautam, your Gatik is focused on the middle mile. So can you introduce Gatik to us and how you were able to, rope in Walmart, such a huge fish, as a customer of Gatik's?
Sure, happy to. So just a bit of background on the company, on myself. So I come from a research background, spent majority of my early career on different kind of robots. Started my career working on bipedal robots, legged robots, and then eventually transitioned to mobile robots and self-driving cars. Went to CMU as a researcher first, and then went back as a graduate student, worked with Professor Dolan. This was back in 2014, 2015. And around that time, the AV peak was, AV hype was at its peak. So everyone was promising tens of thousands of robotaxis by like 2019, 2020. These were supposed to be the years when it became a reality. But obviously, somehow this timeline got pushed throughout, and then somehow it's always 2 or 3 years out. So, going back to 2016 and 2017, we started Gatik. The focus on one, solving a real customer pain point. Second, building a technology that is more near term, and not going after the holy grail of autonomy. So that's how Gatik was born. I started the company along with 2 other co-founders. We focus on the middle mile segment of the supply chain. So this is basically the gap between long haul trucking, which is mostly highway focused on one end, and your last mile delivery robots on the other, which is deliveries to the customer's doorstep. So Gatik's exclusive focus is on this middle mile, where we operate light and medium duty trucks on fixed repeatable routes. So B2B short haul is what we focus on, and this focus has paid off. So over the last few months and few years, the team has made a lot of progress. This year and early next year, we plan to share some of this progress towards commercialization.
Okay. Now, Gautam, let me follow up on that. Have you? So I grew up in Detroit. My first job was at General Motors at an assembly plant, and they worked on, or they believed in lean principles, right? Every part, every day. And so there are a lot of milk runs for the suppliers that were within 120 miles of the factory. So is that also something you're starting to consider? Because they're fixed route. What would happen is they would go to the factory, pick up containers, returnable containers, go to the supplier, drop those containers off, and then pick up parts. So is that something you're also looking at from a logistics standpoint?
For sure, we are. So, when we started the company, we looked at different supply chain, different sectors that we could go after, decided to zero in on online groceries. So back in 2016 and 2017, this online grocery segment was growing like crazy. So the market penetration of online groceries back in 2017 was around single-digit %. Today, with obviously COVID into the mix, that percentage penetration is getting close to 10% plus, and then that number is expected to grow exponentially. So all this to say, with online groceries, these retailers were forced to move their fulfillment centers close to the end consumer. And all of a sudden, there was a need for more trips between these micro DCs to the retail location, more trucks and more drivers. So this supply chain, online groceries, was something that we felt was the right initial use case. But to your point, we see our solution now being used at supply chains of e-commerce companies, distributors. You mentioned the example of auto parts distribution. That's very much within the operational domain that we're now targeting.
Okay, great. So Tudor, your Helm.ai is, or Helm.ai is like platform and hardware agnostic. Where do you see the immediate opportunities? Can you comment on this middle mile delivery? Are you looking at what are the most promising use cases, I guess, you're looking at from the standpoint of commercialization or speed to market?
Yeah, we've definitely looked into all sorts of verticals. As I mentioned at the beginning, so we think of the software that we're building as a vital component of any robotic system, not just autonomous vehicles and not just partially autonomous vehicles. When a company is building an autonomous platform, there's certain components that they just source from suppliers, like batteries and motors. But when it comes to perception and prediction software, all of a sudden, you're building out a research team, getting infrastructure, labels, all that jazz, right? And so what we're looking to do is kind of replace that with a off-the-shelf component that works just as well as the other ones they get. So we do aim to license our software for all these applications. Similar to passenger vehicles, the challenges of reaching L4 for middle mile, last mile, highway trucking, et cetera, is highly differentiated AI software than large-scale validation. So this is still where our deep teaching methodology really shines. And I think that the partnerships that we target with OEMs on partial autonomy, like that's deployed at scale for consumers and passenger vehicles, are checking that box for large-scale validation.
Okay. John, did you want to comment on where you think the closest opportunities for commercialization are?
Well, I don't know if I have anything dramatically new to say. I think the two key things that are needed, which have already been mentioned, are a viable business plan and the ability to validate or to provide convincing assurances that the safety level of the vehicles is sufficient. I've always thought that the long-range trucking instance is an attractive one, in part because there's an economic need as well as a need from the standpoint of the diminishing number of available drivers. Of course, on the one hand, it's easier to handle the various cases that arise on the highway than it is all of the urban special cases that arise, but a large truck traveling at 70 miles an hour can obviously be quite dangerous if it's not, those cases where it fails to be safe. So there are challenges there. The case that Gautam mentioned of middle mile sounds like it's interesting as well, particularly for fixed routes where you can kind of limit the risk and limit the number of unusual situations you might run into, unlike in large cities like Beijing, New York, Tokyo. So that's also a good one. It seems like as I alluded to before, it seems like the ride sharing it's not obvious that that's an economically viable model at this point, and it hasn't gotten as much traction as some people had expected.
Okay, so let me ask you another question, John, and let's switch gears a little bit. What are your thoughts on Tesla's vision-only approach to LiDAR or not to LiDAR, or Waymo's vision LiDAR fusion? Can you comment on the different, what you see as better, worse, different?
Sure. Well, first, just to refresh everybody's memory about what the issues are. On the one hand, vision has a lot of information, and obviously that's extremely valuable. It's coupled with the need to have fairly significant processing, usually, even though there are a lot of slick techniques that can improve upon that, including deep learning based ones. But it's also affected by lighting and obscuration and things like that. The LiDAR, on the other hand, gives you good shape information and very high density, can give you depth information without having to have stereo camera, which can be ambiguous and also is subject to some errors. So, to me, the basic issue is simply, can we make LiDAR cheap enough? And there's obviously a technological race going on to do that right now with a lot of companies playing. I don't think anybody could seriously maintain that adding LiDAR is not going to improve the overall reliability and capability of the system. So it's really just an economic question. And I don't know exactly what the timeline is going to be. There are plenty of, like Waymo's got their own LiDAR that they're producing, and Argo recently acquired a company that is also creating a LiDAR sensor, and they're refining that internally. So it may be that they'll be successful in creating something that's basically commodity level as far as pricing goes. Luminar is another company working on it, and there are several others. So like I say, I don't know the timeline, but my guess would be that that's going to come down in price significantly, and then even Elon Musk may be willing to put it on a Tesla.
Just as an FYI, I'm not sure you're aware of this, guys, but in China, Baidu, who has their own AV platform, Apollo, they launched recently. I visited their AV depot in Yizhuang, which is South Beijing, and they had recently launched an L4 robo-taxi that they said was going to be sold for about 500,000 RMB, which is around $75,000. And I think it had 4 LiDAR and 13 or 14 cameras. And so we are getting there. I think, China, with its huge demand for EVs, is increasing the demand for cheaper LiDAR. For instance, XPeng just recently launched a vehicle for $35,000 that has 2 LiDAR. And so I think the chance of LiDAR becoming more affordable is probably within the next couple of years. And so, Gautam, can I have your comments on the whole LiDAR, not the LiDAR, and why do you think it's better? Because obviously Gatik uses LiDAR. So
let me put it this way. So it's possible to build autonomy stack or vision only autonomy stack, but not for safety critical applications. So to Professor Dolan's point, it comes down to the economics. Does it make sense to use the full sensor suite, meaning cameras, radars, LiDARs? These are different sensor modalities with different build cases. When we look at our application, autonomous trucking, the margins are such where we can use an autonomy stack using different sensor modalities, meaning we have 360 coverage on LiDARs, radars, and cameras. And there is useful information provided in different conditions from each of these different sensor modalities. So in short, yes, it's possible to build an autonomy stack with vision only, but not for, in my opinion, not for safety critical applications. And then choosing a business model where the margins are such where you can use LiDARs, and yes, the cost of the LiDARs are coming down drastically. So they will be at a price point where you would see them in regular passenger vehicles. So yeah, the industry is headed in the right direction. So I don't believe that there's any use of or any need of cutting corners when it comes to different sensor modalities.
Okay, so let me ask you guys this, and I'll throw it out to all of you guys, because we're getting a bit wonky, and I wanted to kind of bring it up a couple levels and just kind of ask for opinions, because I'm just nerding out as well. But I mean, do you guys think the legacies have a real opportunity to be major players in the next 10 years when it comes to robotaxis, platforms and services with regards to autonomous vehicles? Let me ask Tudor. Like, I know you're working with Honda right now. Honda.
So could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, like, so I know you're working with the Honda Accelerator, and Honda is known to be a bit more conservative when it comes to embracing technology and innovation in their vehicles. So do you feel that, as a general
Sure.
statement, do you think the legacies are going to be able to compete with companies like yours and Gatik, or because here?
Well, look,
here,
I mean, I don't think we're competing. I don't think we're competing with the legacies. But I think it's funny that you asked the question that way, because like, I'm not seeing evidence of like these like widely deployed robotaxis anywhere. Like, I think asking if they can compete, well, I think we have to be more realistic about where the AV industry is. On a more serious note, like, the reality is that, like, okay, in our opinion, the most difficult challenge in AV is the software and the validation. And I think, like, the software is just getting exponentially better. Like, AI just keeps getting better. To John's point, compute hardware is like a must, right, for vision. But actually, if you think about like scalable L4, like even if you're using a LiDAR, like you still have to build the system that understands like the 10,000 subtle cues that would help you navigate like a New York City intersection. So I think like what's really going on is that like the software like keeps getting better and eventually will become somewhat commoditized. And then my question is, well, look, it's like, the OEMs, they have distribution centers, they have manufacturing capacity, they have quality control, they have like the customer touch point, like the dealerships. There's like a lot of stuff they have. And, I think it's still unclear, as we've been discussing, what exactly will be the killer business model. So I think that like, in my view, it's by no means the case that like, these like Silicon Valley companies have just won. They're going to take over like highway trucking, and like, what are the OEMs going to do? It's more like, there's going to be a couple more years, like maybe like 5 years, maybe 10 years, as like the market sorts itself out. And then I think it's time to ask, like, can somebody survive? But I think it's a bit too early for that.
Right, right. The reason I bring that up is because there are a number of pilot programs across different use cases here in China. And, when it comes to the EV sector here, the 800-pound gorilla is obviously Tesla globally, but NIO and XPeng, from a market cap standpoint are big players, but from a volume standpoint, to your point, Tudor, they're very, very small, right? But in China, the two most important things when you're shopping for a car is safety and connectivity. And autonomous features or ADAS features kind of imply safety, right? And so I think that's the strong reason XPeng put those two LiDAR in there. And then what we'll see is the legacies really try to play catch up, because what we're finding is that the EVs from the legacies, for Volkswagen here in China, because their features are lacking versus safety features are lacking versus an XPeng, they're not seeing the increase in EV sales that they would in versus an XPeng, right? And so that's why it seems to be a bit more accelerated here than in the United States. But I feel the infrastructure bill is probably going to accelerate that a lot. And so John, do you see? Go ahead, Tudor. You had a comment?
Yeah, I just very quickly, I think I understood your question, but I mean, I think I can't really comment on AVs, but I think, companies like Helm are very happy to provide like great software. And, I don't think it's necessary to like bundle software development for like AVs with like building the cars themselves. So I think OEMs have like a pretty good shot.
Right. Okay. And John, do you, and not to oversimplify, but is it just that the United States just needs to have many more pilots and creating more awareness about these autonomous vehicles in order to get more acceptance? Because I know the safety is a huge issue, but part of becoming safer is having more AVs testing around the United States, right? So is it as simple as that, or does there need to be pretty deep education by the consumer for the consumer in order to create more acceptance quickly?
Education might be helpful, or greater education, or even a sort of targeted campaign to try to influence people's thinking about it. But what I would say is it's not just a matter of creating more pilots, because I think, that could increase the number of accidents and possibly fatalities. And the 2018 Uber accident and fatality, of course, affected things pretty strongly, like in Pennsylvania and I think other states, but I knew it firsthand in Pennsylvania. There were much stricter requirements on testing vehicles. And I think, of course, there's an asymmetric psychology. People, to the extent they know about it, take as a matter of course that 35,000 plus Americans and a million people worldwide die in traffic accidents. But if numbers coming anywhere near that began to be experienced even proportionally for autonomous driving, that would, I think, shut it down. So that's where the education might play a role, but I think people's strong bias is to say, hey, the autonomy needs to be perfect, basically, or very close to it. Otherwise, we're not going to accept it. And that's a bit of a problem. And I think we've seen since 2018 a decrease in the acceptance based on some of the polls that I've seen.
Okay, got it.
Just quickly,
let me add.
Tuli,
Yeah, go ahead.
add some more color just to drive home the point. I think the narrative was back in 2016, 17, and 18. It was Silicon Valley against Detroit. More lately, it's this industry, everyone now realizes it's a partnership-heavy industry. So both the AV developers and the OEMs, they have to work together to actually solve this problem at scale. So now the narrative is, being an AV developer, you have to have that OEM partnership to roll out this technology at scale safely. And that's where now both Silicon Valley and Detroit, using that analogy, they're working hand in hand to actually solve this massive problem.
Correction, Gautam. Pittsburgh versus Detroit, not Silicon Valley versus Detroit.
Over time, everything's changing. Yes.
So Um, that brings up HD maps, Gautam. So let me ask you, since Gatik focuses on the same routes for a given client, how much does it rely on updated HD maps, and what frequency do you need? Do they need to be updated? Can you comment a little bit about your use of HD maps?
Sure, happy to. So the way we look at our application, the fact that we do fixed repeatable routes, whatever rich priors we can feed to the autonomy stack, that's very valuable, right? To give you an example, let's say we can track at the sun reflection at one of the lens at a particular time of the day. So all of these valuable information, rich priors, is helpful to introduce as much predictability into the stack as we can. Another example, we saw this early on. When we deployed our truck at one of our customer sites, our perception stack was picking up a USPS mailbox as a pedestrian. It was slowing down, right? One of the things that we could do, our team could do, was just go back and basically mark that mailbox as a stationary box. We could feed that as one of the priors. We said, okay, it's not a pedestrian, it's a mailbox. We didn't have to retrain our perception stack, collect a lot of data, annotate that data and retrain the model. We didn't have to do all of that. We were able to do this because there is predictability in the routes. We knew that, okay, this particular object on this route at this point, it's a mailbox, not a pedestrian. So this was an initial, I would say, fix, but over time, obviously, we have to retrain our perception stack to to be able to detect and classify these objects. But when we think about maps, whatever prior information we can, provide to the stack, all of that is very useful, very helpful. So the way the stack is designed today, our dependency on maps is reducing over time, meaning we do not need a lot of detailed up-to-date maps. So over time, the dependency on maps is reducing, but whatever prior information that we can feed for our planning module, for the decision-making module, all of that is very helpful. But long term, we have to continue reducing the dependency. Our application is such where we do not have to map a city, right? It's route by route, so economics also makes sense.
Okay. And Tudor, can you comment on your use of HD maps, or how your system relies on HD maps?
Yeah, we don't really touch HD maps, so it's real-time perception. No, but I think, look, it's like it was funny, the question about LiDAR. If you have an HD map and it's useful, you should use it. It's cost effective, right? So we don't really prescribe anything, but I actually do think it's important to note that you can just look at the progress in computer vision AI. It's just incredible what people are able to do with like generative models and like these very large scale trainings. So I think it's very clear that perception is just on a huge upswing. It's like not even close to tapping out, and we do think that there should not be really a need for HD maps in 5 to 10 year time horizon.
And so let me move it over to the regulatory side, because part of what's going on with AVs, the policies need to catch up to the innovation and the technology. So Gautam, your vehicles operate in suburban environments a bit. So how does Gatik showcase to regulators and those that are against autonomous vehicles being on the road that they're safe, especially when you've removed the driver?
Yeah, so our use case is intrastate, meaning so right now, just as a recap, there is no AV focused regulation at the federal level, right? Everything is at the state level. So today there are around 23 states in the US where applications like Gatik, we can take the driver out and commercialize the service. And then there are 40 plus states where they have some regulations when it comes to AVs, So what we do is work very closely with the state regulators and the policymakers, inform them about the use case that we are going after. Obviously, education and is a big part of what we do. A good example is we had our first commercial deployment with Walmart at their headquarters in Arkansas. This was back in summer 2019. And then, for about 18 months, we worked very closely with this Arkansas State Highway Commission, shared with them the data, the progress that we had made, how the technology worked. So that relationship building, that insight, data-informed decision-making approach that we took with the Arkansas State Commission allowed us to win the permit. So in December of last year, Gatik and Walmart won the regulatory approval to do driverless runs in the state of Arkansas. It was a state first, and this was a good example how an AV developer work together with an AV adopter to get the regulatory approval needed to commercialize this without anyone behind the steering wheel. So this is basically what we do at other states as well. So whatever customer sites that we expand to, we work very closely with the state regulators and policymaker, informing them of the use case and then working together to inform the regulations and policies.
Okay, and Tudor, how does Helm track the progress of regulation and across the L2, the L4 autonomy products that you're building? Because there are some automakers, I won't name any particular, that I think talk about how good their systems are, but their legal teams probably make them. Anyways, yeah. So how do you track the regulatory environment and incorporate that into your system?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think that we just follow all the regulatory and certification requirements that are needed to ship. There's actually a lot of them for, when you go into automotive, there's two main ones: functional safety, and then this thing called SOTIF, safety of the intended functionality. The first one has to do with software faults. The second one has to do with validation and accuracy. Even before touching these regulatory elements, we believe that safety is the most important aspect of shipping at scale. And I think that's where the technology has always offered, key advantages in scalable and supervised learning. And, as I said, to get to L4, I think it's really a question of the software quality and the validation. And the best way to do that is to, deploy at scale with an OEM, see hundreds of millions of miles of data, and then you measure, how good are you really? It's a pretty simple story.
Okay, so let me ask John. The SAE has defined L0 to L5, and China actually recently launched their version of L0 to L5. It's a bit more detailed than the current SAE description, John, but it leaves it up to the companies and the startups to define the operational design domain. So much so that for a single trip, a driver could go from L2 to L4. And what efforts are the industry taking to simplify the terminology, and what are you hearing and what are you seeing in order to get everybody on the same page with an understanding of, okay, this is discrete L2 capabilities, this is discrete L4 capabilities, or is it always going to be a bit jumbled together?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what Gautam and Tudor think about this one as well, but I don't see any strong efforts on the part of the industry to educate people on what the meaning of the different L levels is. I think there's a little bit of confusion about it. So, for example, when I ask the autonomous driving class I teach each year which level Tesla's autopilot is at, not everybody says L2, which I think is maybe the technically correct answer. They might say L3, or maybe even some will say L4, maybe leaving out of their minds or not remembering or not having known that Tesla says that you have to keep your hands on the wheel the whole time. I guess in part because they've heard about people watching Harry Potter movies or sleeping in the back seat when it's on autopilot. So, I mean, I do think that they're useful classifications, but I don't think they're commonly widely understood exactly what they are. And on the operational design domains that you mentioned, it's interesting, like you said, if you could have on a single trip multiple ODDs, which suggests that the human has to be aware of what's going on at all times, because one of those L levels could be one in which he needs to intervene. So then, do you call the whole thing L2 for that reason, or maybe L3 where the system has to be able to properly notify, as opposed to the L4 that might be correct for one of those domains? I don't know.
Just a quick comment, John. I think Elon implies that his system is higher than L2, but I think his legal team slapped him on the wrist and said, okay, let's make sure our customers read the fine print.
Right.
And, we say it's L2 only, but, Gautam, can you comment on that?
And I wish I had the perfect answer here, but yeah, there are all kinds of definitions in the industry. I've heard, obviously, L2 plus. We early on used to say constraint level 4. The idea was to show that okay, a use case is very different from a geofenced ODD. It's a fixed route ODD. But I think, yeah, right now terminology in this space, and especially when it comes to levels of autonomy, that's a big problem, right? The way I personally look at the Tesla autopilot system, it's a glorified ADAS system. It's good, the technology is super good for an ADAS system, but obviously not an L4 system. But to Professor Dolan's point, the market education or general public education is very important. How do you keep the general public informed, especially them being the users of this technology? That's I think one challenge that the industry is trying to address. And there are good efforts like there are organizations like PAVE trying to educate the general public about what does it mean to have an L2 system versus an L4. And I think the sooner we can bridge the gap when it comes to market information, general public information and knowledge, the better it would be for the industry. I'm concerned for level 2 developers, selling the technology as L4, and then the end users misusing this technology. So, yeah, I think it's important for the industry to fix this as soon as we can.
One of the things I will kind of differentiate between how Tesla operates in the United States and how they operate in China. There's hundreds, thousands of videos of people using FSD 10, beta 10 on Twitter and on YouTube, but that doesn't happen here in China because they would get shut down pretty quickly. And so I feel that there was an article I read that said, Tesla customers or owners, they sign the waiver for being beta testers, but pedestrians don't, right? And so I think that's kind of where I see it, where it's like, okay, these guys are beta testing, but we didn't volunteer to also beta test. But Tudor, do you have any comments to add?
Just like a quick one, which is that, I think that some companies advertise high levels of capability because that's one of the differentiating aspects of the marketing. But if you look at incumbent OEMs, they don't need to make huge advances here to sell a lot of cars. And so I just don't think they're as incentivized to make these kinds of claims. And actually we've seen, on our end is that, when incumbent OEMs are thinking about L3, they really mean eyes off, mind off, systems that are safe enough, with validation. And, I think that things are on a good trajectory, at least from the safety perspective.
So and you guys correct me if you know, or if you know that I'm wrong, but I believe last year Honda was the first company to launch L3 in Japan. So and it was only for traffic jams, and so you could read in the car during a traffic jam, slow moving. But once I believe you got to a certain speed limit, then you had to take back over. So I think it's starting to roll out a little bit. I think Honda is still the only one, if I'm not mistaken. But we are heading towards the Q&A session, so I'm going to ask a couple of rapid fire questions to you guys. Okay, so Tudor, what is the North Star metric for your company or lab?
Revenue.
Give me two.
No, we track the breadth and accuracy of all the features we send to our customers. We care a lot about making them happy.
Gautam, what about you? What about Gatik?
Yeah, I would say number of routes that are whitelisted for unmanned operations and time to unmanned. So it's different from like the industry. Our business model is very much route by route and side by side. So how long does it take for us to go unmanned on one particular route, and how many routes have you whitelisted for unmanned operation? These are the two metrics that we track.
And John, what do you feel are two of the three of the most important metrics for progress in the sector?
Well, for my lab, we're looking at developing provably safe driving behaviors for difficult traffic scenarios primarily. And so I think that ties into what we've all mentioned several times, validation, dealing with the remaining difficult cases, but it can't be in an ad hoc way. There has to be some rigor to it because it's impossible to drive the billions of miles in reality that would maybe be suggested by a probabilistic, reliability engineering approach.
Okay, so outside of your company, can you name one or two companies that you admire, that you track, that you kind of think are doing really well in their vertical or their sector?
I can go first. So there's a company called Outrider. They do autonomous yard operations. It's similar thesis to Gatik, structured autonomy. So that's one company that I personally like.
Tudor, what about you? What company are you like, oh, that's pretty cool what they do?
I have a lot of respect for, some of the traditional OEMs that are rolling out software safely, in a useful way without misleading about anything they do. And yeah, I think that's like the way to build trust and actually scale.
Okay. And John, what are, outside of the AV sector, what companies are you like, wow, man, what they're doing is pretty cool?
Outside the AV sector. I guess I'll just put in a plug for some of the, of course, Gautam came out of the MRSD program that I direct, and there have been a number of students coming out of that program who have started their own companies, some in the service robotics space and some in some other spaces. So I'm a cheerleader for them. I guess I'd put it at that.
Okay.
Fifth season.
That's right, fifth season.
So I think we can open it up for questions now if anybody has any questions, but I will leave with this last question to the panel. Gautam, who's your favorite entrepreneur of all time, like throughout history?
And it has to be the legend, Steve Jobs, a true visionary. His philosophies around team building, focus, all of that resonates well with me personally. So yeah.
Tudor, how about you?
I mean, it's a government project, not a technical entrepreneur, but I think there's this guy, Leslie Groves, who did an incredible job on the Manhattan Project. And I think there's a lot of similarities to that challenge and the kind of challenges we have to address in the 21st century.
So I'm gonna ask you guys questions from the audience, but to some folks in the West, China and Asia is a bit of a black box. And so for you, the panelists, if you guys have any questions of me, because there's a number of autonomous vehicle, electric vehicle companies that are doing a lot of ADAS stuff, not only in China, but in Southeast Asia. So if you guys have any questions about China or Asia, please feel free to ask me. Let me try to
Hey, shout out to Glenn DeVries, CMU entrepreneur, CMU trustee, went up in the Blue Origin spaceship today. It cost him a pretty penny, but he had started Metadata, which is a clinical trial software company, and went public and sold the Dassault systems. Many of you probably know Dassault because it's a really deep engineering technology company. And hey, nobody mentioned Matt Rogers, inventor of the iPhone, inventor of Nest Labs. Come on, man. I got more. I got many more, but I'm going to shut up because I'm not my night.
Well, and there's Boom, right? Who's trying
Boom
to
Supersonic, absolutely.
democratize the supersonic. Let me see here. So the first question is, how many winners can there be in the autonomous vehicle market? Let me ask.
The winner, Waymo trucks.
Let me start with you, Gautam. Like, I mean, is it a winner take all, or is it okay? We're gonna have dominant players in certain verticals.
I would say dominant players for different verticals. If you look at the other verticals, there's usually like 2 or 3. I would say 2 key players in every vertical. So in the autonomy space, it will be application focused. And I would say like 2 for each vertical.
Okay. Tudor, what do you think? Do you think it's a winner take all thing? Because especially for Helm, who is kind of, we're not just doing AVs. I mean, you guys could become the 800-pound gorilla across.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're happy to supply anybody who wants to work on autonomy. I mean, I actually think that there's some chance the AV industry becomes kind of like the airline industry, where everybody has like somewhat similar capabilities, and like we're competing on price and regions and like trims and the kinds of tickets you sell, and that's not like the greatest industry these days. So I think that like the one thing I think is not true is that like there's some sort of like large scale software advantage. I think that no matter how big your fleet is, like it will never be as large as like all the world's video data sets. And generally speaking, like other kinds of advantages will have to be sought to like really lock in like some sort of market leading position for a long time. I don't know what those will be yet.
And you raise a good point, Tudor, because a company like Volkswagen, who has 8 or 9 brands, right? When they have a physical product, it's very easy to differentiate in the market. Volkswagen versus Porsche or Audi, right? But as they move towards a platform, how do we digitize this positioning of a Volkswagen? Because what they're trying to do is create a platform as well, right? And it could be commercial where
and I think that like I mean, to that point, I think like entrepreneurs will always understand their verticals better than like like competitors are trying to enter. So I think like middle mile is one thing, highways one thing, like local delivery trucks is another thing, delivery rope. Like there's so many different ways to differentiate, that I think it's tough to say that like, oh, it'll be winner take all just because, something like, I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
Let me see here. So I have an opinion on this, but I'll ask you fellas, what is your opinion on autonomous parking? Hyundai announced on its webpage that the company will commercialize autonomous valet parking in 2023. Let me start by saying, John, let me quickly start by saying that that's already been commercialized in China. So Baidu has done it, Xpeng has done intelligent, and so it memorizes a parking spot. I mean, it's kind of useless for going to the mall and finding a parking spot, but if you live in a high rise and you have the same parking spot, it's helpful for that. But I think at least in China, it's kind of the cost of doing business feature, not even a differentiator. But John, you were gonna say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it could be high impact in changing the landscape of cities, in that right now, I think about 35% of city real estate is for parking. And so if you could call your car ahead of time, well, go get dropped off at the Symphony Hall, have your car go out to some outskirt location where there's a large parking facility, and then 20 minutes before the concert, put in your smartphone that you wanted to pick you up. That would help to reduce congestion in cities. So I think long term, it may end up changing the way that cities are built.
Yeah, and I think for China and some parts of Asia where most people live in high rises, it creates different situations and use cases. So the Chinese government, I think 6 or 7 years ago, put requirements in for any new construction for mixed use buildings to have 20% piles, or 20% of their parking spots having charging piles. You didn't have to have a charging station, but you had to have a charging pile for that capability. And so, I think the United States needs to really step up some of that stuff in order to get outside of the major cities from adopting EVs, right? So this is a good one. John, what hypotheses did you have about the AV world 5 or 10 years ago that proved false today?
Well, the simplest one is, everybody, partly because it was a round number, was saying 2020 was the year to have widespread deployment. And I went along with that for want of a better hypothesis. But I think the main thing, I think, is just what everybody has said, which is it's a harder problem than we expected to iron out the last whatever number percent we want to call it, 3 to 5% of cases, particularly in urban driving, that are dangerous, too dense, chaotic, unpredictable, whatever.
Okay. No,
So
Gautam,
Dolan,
let me ask you.
I have a question for Professor Dolan. What would be your prediction today?
Yeah,
I think we should open that up for. I think since you guys are, I think since all you guys are working on the future, you guys should all give 2 or 3 predictions, and we'll come back in 5 years.
But yeah.
Well, I think I should be sufficiently chastened not to make a prediction, but maybe a general way of saying it is we've talked about different verticals, different business cases. I think it's going to be different for all of them. Like an obvious thing is we should be able to do highway driving before highway autonomous driving before we can do the urban driving, just because it's overall simpler and the conditions can be controlled a little bit more easily. But exact time when it's going to happen, it's that would depend on what are we saying. Are we saying 95% penetration or something different? So I don't know. Maybe you guys will be daring enough to give dates.
Dr. Tudor, do you guys have any predictions or that you want to throw out there?
I think we'll have widespread deployment between 3
right now, but is the talent pool deep enough to support all AV companies? Let me ask a very simplistic question. Is it whoever gets the most capital is going to win, or do you guys believe there's a secret sauce that's going to be a difference maker ultimately that allows you to recruit? Because you saw, well, there's a statistic I saw on Twitter after Tesla's AI day for the spike in applications into Tesla. So, I mean, is the talent pool deep enough? Because you'd mentioned that it's Pittsburgh, Silicon Valley, and Detroit now. And I know there's not enough, I won't say not a lot, there's not enough software developers and machine learning scientists in Detroit. So, from that talent pool, do you guys think it's deep enough? Because I don't think John can add another 5 classes to his curriculum every semester. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd like to hear what the other guys think, Tudor and Gautam, but I'll just briefly say that for robotics in general, not just AV, the demand from the companies that I'm in contact with through the MRSD program is far higher than the supply. The supply is, for our program, 45 students a year, roughly. This year, it's going to be only 19 because of COVID. So the companies are crying to have more people all the time.
By the way, just quickly, Pittsburgh now employs over 10,000 people in the robotics and AV industry and growing. So we are importing people into Pittsburgh all the time.
And we need to open up a Pittsburgh office soon. But to underscore and echo what Professor Dolan said, it's all about talent. That was one of the reasons why we set up a second office in Toronto, Canada, very early on. So, in early 2019, we decided to, set up a engineering office in Toronto to be close to the talent pool. The AI machine learning talent in the GTA area, out of universities like UT, UW is really good. But then, we're looking to expand and add presence in different cities in the US as well. So, Pittsburgh is definitely on the radar. Obviously, having spent years there, and my co-founder Arjun, he also spent a couple of years in Pittsburgh at CMU. So that's a city, and obviously CMU is close to our heart. So we'll set up a presence there.
Tudor,
I have a bit of a contrarian take on this. I think I assume most people here are familiar with AlphaGo, and I think that if you had gone a year or two before AlphaGo, you could have probably dumped 10,000 engineers and a couple $1 billion into building better GoBots. and you still would have had a lot of trouble once AlphaGo came out. And there was about like 20 people on that paper. I think that like AVs, or some of the parts of AVs, like at their core are just like AI problems. And I think those benefit from large amounts of compute and data, but generally speaking, like, the quality of the algorithms, I think scales with like the infinity norm of the size of the team and not the L1 norm. So I think that like, for certain sub problems, it's really about the quality of the team that matters. And I think there was a question from Lisa Carter, and yeah, absolutely, like opening up to remote like makes a huge impact. It's easier to find like the best people. It's easier to hire them. So I think it's probably necessary, for any company that wants to compete.
So as a non-technical person, this question resonates with me. What is the outlook for hiring, including non-engineers, in the AV market? Like, can you guys give me a percentage of engineers to non-engineers on staff? Is it like 80% engineers and 20% admin and overhead, or what's the ratio for you guys? Gautam?
Sure. So our business team or the non-technical team is pretty lean. So it's mostly engineers. I would say 70 to 30% is the current ratio. Not considering our operations team, like in the field, we have a large fleet. So, but yeah, I would say like the industry as a whole is entering a very interesting phase. The focus at most of the AV companies is on commercialization. So it's understanding what are the needs of the customer, how this technology can be deployed. I think that's the phase that we are entering. So non-technical talent is super critical, and I think that's going to be the trend that we'll see for the next few years.
Your autonomous driving.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Tudor? How big is your non?
No, it about matches. What Gautam was saying. I think sales is critical, product's critical, management's critical. I think that these companies, like the software focused ones, will mirror like Silicon Valley distributions.
Think Google 2001 to 2004 or Facebook 2007 to 2010. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see an influx of product management, of sales, right? There's going to be huge growth on the business side.
So here's a good one, and I think it might have come from one of John's students, actually. For those new to the AV industry but passionate about learning more about it and potentially joining it, where would you recommend starting to educate yourself? Let's say Tudor, why don't you start?
So the question was for somebody who's not in AV and wants to enter AV.
Like, yeah, it's a pretty broad question. Where would you recommend starting to educate yourself?
I mean, there's so many different roles. I mean, I think that AV companies, just like anybody else, needs great software folks, product folks. So I think that the normal path for educating oneself in those roles would also work here. And I think on the algorithm side of things, just staying up to date on deep learning, learning mathematical modeling. I think in our view, those are the key building blocks of a great AV stack. So yeah, I mean, for some roles like the standard way, and for other roles, beefing up on math, stats, that kind of thing. Sorry, it's too broad to answer like in more details.
Sure, no, understood. Gautam, do you have anything to add in particular that?
Nothing specific. I would say like panel discussions like these is a good starting point as well. So nothing more to add.
Right.
I have one or two things. So I agree with what Tudor said, like motion planning, controls, perception, machine learning, software engineering, those are all important. There are some pretty good courses online. I haven't gone through all the details on them, but the Udacity and Coursera courses, I think, on autonomous driving provide some good fundamental information, which is in many ways similar to what we teach in the autonomous driving component of the robot mobility course that we have in the MRSD program. So that's one place as well.
Okay, so let me ask Gautam this, because this is a question for me actually. So how is it working with Walmart? Because they're obviously a traditional retail play that's trying to digitize. Are you finding that they're very open to you know, how Gatik operates, probably very lean, you know, very technical. Or I mean, how's that relationship?
It's going very strong. So, you know, Walmart and Loblaw, which is Canada's largest retailer, are just two of the customers that we have announced publicly. In addition to these companies, we are working with multiple other Fortune 500 customers. Again, other top retailers, e-commerce companies, distributors. So, you know, Walmart has been our flagship customer since 2019. That partnership has progressed very well. It's been very fruitful, and we do plan to announce and share a few things in the coming months. So it's a long-term partnership that we have with them. We're scaling and expanding with them. So overall, you know, I think, you know, it's in the right direction, headed in the right direction. And then I think Walmart as a company is very interesting because, you know, just the sheer size at which they operate and the openness that you know, they operate at. You know, they are believers in autonomy long term, and yeah, you know, we have learned a lot working with them. So overall, going strong, and then a few more things to share in the coming months.
Gautam, you're my bud, and I want you to be successful. But think about Bossa Nova and what happened with Bossa Nova.
We have multiple other customers. Obviously,
no, I'm just saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me ask Dave. Dave, who's your favorite entrepreneur? This was a question I missed earlier here. So, who's your favorite entrepreneur?
I have a tie between Boris Softman, who founded Anki, which was the coolest and the first commercial autonomous driving company ever, albeit at the Matchbox level. They launched on Apple's Worldwide Developer Council stage in 2013 and had 3 straight years of revenue over $100 million from 2016, 17, and 18. Hit a wall. But another CMU startup bought their company and they're bringing them back to life this fall. So I'll just stop right there. But Boris Softman, you know, Mark Palatucci, Hans Tappiner, amazing guys, all amazing guys. Salt of the earth people, good people. As is Matt Rogers, who invented the iPhone, made the first 4 iPhones, the first iPad, left Apple to found Nest Labs. Now part of it is the Google Home platform. He's doing a new company, Chewy Labs. Check it out. It's going to kick butt. Those are my 2 recent most favorites. Did you know Adobe Acrobat was a CMU company? You probably didn't. I could just go on and on, but I'll just stop there.
Yeah, so that's a good segue because I think we've just run out of time. But I wanted to thank Gautam, Tudor, and John for joining us. I want to thank the audience, CMU alums, friends of CMU for joining. Hopefully this was entertaining and informative. And I'm planning